Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. You recognize this guy. This is Josh Honeycutt. He's a regular DDH contributor and now TV contributor. Josh, thanks for joining us for Deer Talk Now again.
It's an honor to be here.
You know, Josh, we've been talking a lot about, you do so much for the magazine that is, I get a lot of good comments from people because you bring a lot of your tactical mind to those pieces, the how-to pieces. And today I want to talk about early season hunting because I know a lot of people talk about it, but you should place your stand here, you should place your stand there. This is how you need to approach it. But actually, the talk and the getting it done are two different things, and I know you do both. And you just wrote an article for us that was in the magazine. It was talking about that early season. Now, that could be August, it could be September, but let's dive into that. And how did you I know you're not going to take any credit for this, but how did you crack the code for hunting early season whitetails?
Listening to smarter people than I am. But, the early season, to the topic, that's my favorite time of year. Everybody, the rut gets all the glory, but the early season is really king when it comes to whitetails, in my opinion.
I agree with you. And for me, as you know, I'll be happy with whatever comes by. And if that could be a 120-inch deer, it could be a 150-inch deer. Mm-hmm. This year I was blessed. I got a mix of all of those. But that early season gives you that first crack opportunity. And for me, it's like, if I miss the rut, I miss the rut. As long as I have a shot at a nice buck, I'm going to do that.
Absolutely. The early season provides so many advantages that the rut can't give you, in my opinion. The way I've kind of always looked at it is the early season through the pre-rut is the best time of year for the prepared hunter, and the rut is the best time of year for the unprepared hunter. I'm both every year because I hunt all season long. I hunt 3 to 4 different states, and so I go on trips where I am unprepared, and I usually save those for the rut because the rut's kind of, I don't want to call it a crutch, but it's kind of a crutch for us deer hunters. It makes things easier, at least from a deer movement perspective. And so in the states where I am most familiar with, the places that I'm most familiar with, areas that I think are most attuned to early season deer activity, I usually hunt during the early season. And then the places that I don't necessarily have as much time to scout, or maybe they're a lot further away from home, I usually save those for the rut. So, but yeah, the early season, in my opinion, that's usually where I hunt at home the most, where I hunt my favorite places the most. And if you have the time to dedicate to scouting, I think it's the best time of year to kill the oldest buck possible.
It's a great way of looking at it because I agree with you 100%. If you're a guy like myself, and I've hopscotched across my own state, just in my own personal hunting, so many different, I couldn't even count how many different areas, properties, leases that I had and I lost, and the rut was always like the kind of the fallback where it's like I don't really know this property well enough, but I know deer habitat well enough that I can pinpoint a couple good funnels or pinch points that I can find success during the rut. But hunting those, it depends upon where you live. I know I'm just going to throw a blanket across it and say September or early October. I know we open usually the second Saturday of September. You guys in Kentucky open
first weekend in September.
So is that pretty much, is it almost like a turkey hunting mentality? Because when I first got into turkey hunting, the old timers told me you're not going to become a really good turkey hunter until you really know the land that you hunt. You have to know all those little nooks and crannies and the creeks and the places that turkeys aren't going to. And once you know that land, that's what I found. I become a much better turkey hunter. Kind of the same thing with deer hunting.
Yeah, I think so. Like you were talking about, when it comes to the rut, I feel like the learning curve is shorter because the deer are moving so much more, and they're not more predictable because they're less predictable, right? But the type of topographic features that you can take advantage of seem to be a little more predictable. Like you're talking about funnels, pinch points, benches, the downwind sides of ridges when bucks are cruising during the rut. But when it comes to the early season, they're so much more spread out because there's so much more food available. There's a lot less pressure, so the deer haven't been condensed into those tight spaces once they do later in the season. And so I feel like it takes more time, like you said, to learn the property, figure out where the deer are going to be at during the early season. But once you figured it out, you figured it out.
So when we know about the food sources, if I just had to give you an open book, and I know you wrote about this in your articles, what are some of the go-tos for you if you had to start over and scout a property for September? Where are you going to start scouting, and what are you going to start looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously so many different food groups when it comes to whitetails, but I like, I mean, I'm in South Central Kentucky is where I hunt the most. I hunt also hunt in Ohio, hunt in Tennessee. So at that time of year, we're still looking at soybean fields. Obviously, that's the big flashy food source that everybody wants to talk about is soybean fields, and it's important because deer are hitting those hard.
Let me stop you with soybeans, and let's talk about that before you go on to your next thought. Talk to me like I know nothing about soybeans. How do you approach hunting soybeans?
Yeah. I mean, the scouting process, that's the thing I love about summer. I'll back up 1 second and then come right back to soybeans. The thing that I love about summer is you have so much time to scout during the preseason. A lot of people don't use the preseason. They don't take full advantage of the scouting window you have available, because the deer in June, July, August, leading to September, they're very comparable patterns, at least the places that I hunt. So if you start scouting in June or July, you got 2.5 months, maybe 3 months to figure out, start piecing together these patterns, and they'll change because deer patterns do change, but you're still going to be at least in the game enough. It gives you time to find the deer and then pattern the deer. And that's why early season, September, has been my favorite time of year. Most of my biggest deer have been killed in September. And so when it comes back to soybeans, like we were talking about, I'm deploying trail cameras and as many as possible just to take inventory. And these are going to be on those soybean field edges. And I'm going to put, there's really good spots that you can look at, inside field corners. I really like small watering holes. So something that I do on the properties that I manage is I will actually put in small, secluded. I'll go in. I've dug them by hand, and I've also rented an excavator and dug it myself because I'm familiar and I have a little bit of a background in excavating equipment. So I really like to deploy cameras, stands. It's the same mentality when you're trying to find a deer with a camera. A lot of times is where you're going to actually put your stand locations. Not always, but sometimes. And so I really like watering holes on the edges of soybean fields just inside of cover, staging areas. We talk about staging areas a lot. But inside field corners are really good. I've seen that, deer really like to bed. I hunt in hills country, so we have a mixture of hills as well as ag fields. And so the deer, in my experience, bed a lot on these northern slopes in the summer and leading into the early season in September because they get more shade there. And so I like to try to figure out how deer are kind of coming off of those northern-facing slopes to the ag fields that are available. But there's so many different tactics around soybean fields. I guess you could deploy. We could go in so many different directions. But
that's a pretty good one right there that I never really thought about. Looking for an area that offers more shade cover that's adjacent, because we know a lot of time, well, especially those bigger bucks, they're coming to those fields, but you pretty much got to pinpoint how they're getting out of them. Mm-hmm. And then once they get into them, that's a whole nother ball game. But so you're trying to catch them just as they're coming out.
Yeah, I'm spending more time closer to the food than I am, when it comes to hunting whitetails, you've got point A, the bedding area, point B, the food source, or vice versa, depending on, if it's a morning or afternoon hunt. And early season, I don't want to get right on the beds. I have before if I felt like I had to, but I would much rather be further away and closer to the food. Now, there's also this argument that don't hunt them up close to bed or food and hunt them in between in the travel routes, and you spook fewer deer. If you have a property layout that allows you to do that, that's a better option. Because if you're camped out on the soybean field and you go in for the afternoon hunt, sure, you're not going to spook any deer going in.
On the way out, you will.
But you're coming out, you're going to spook them all. And so, and the same is true if you're trying to hunt a bedding area on the fringe of a bedding area of an afternoon. Going in, you run high risk of blowing those deer out. But if you hunt directly in between along those travel routes, then you're going to have a really good opportunity to intercept those deer as they're coming and going. and you're not going to have as high of a risk of bumping those. Now, it also depends on property layout. So, like, for example, one of the primary farm that I hunt in Kentucky doesn't allow me to do that very well because of the property layout, the way that the property lines exist, and how everything kind of flows throughout the property, but primarily because of my access direction. I can only access that property from the southwest, and so it really limits on what I can do, what I can't do, how I circle in, circle out. Just the composition of the property really influences what I'm able to do or not do, and it's something I talk about a lot, situational tactics. And we like to paint deer hunting in this this realm of absolutes. And what I've learned, especially over the last few years, by listening to hunters again that are much smarter than I am, that the absolutes are the rule, but we need to listen to the exceptions more often than we do. Just a prime example is hunting mornings. Most people don't hunt mornings during the early season because generally you're going to have not as much success doing that. But you might have an exception where that's a really good situation. Prime example, we're talking about soybeans. So I didn't end up killing this deer. I ended up killing my deer at a different property. But I started out the season hunting 2 different deer, and I was kind of bouncing between the 2 based on, what wind directions I had, whether it was a morning or afternoon. So there was one deer that I was hunting of a morning, and there was one deer I was hunting of an afternoon, just because of the property layout. Both of them were kind of situated over soybean, bed to feed patterns on soybeans. And there was one situation where I was hunting right on the edge of the soybeans, but I couldn't get in there in the morning, right? But I had deployed a hard-sided, relatively scent-proof ground blind, and I'd actually spent the night in it the evening before. That way I could be there for the morning hunt the next morning. And so if you kind of think outside the box, you can maybe create situations where the exceptions work for you rather than the rule. And I didn't actually get that deer, the one that I was hunting of a morning, but I did have him in front of me. I almost got a shot at him. It was a really cool situation where I'd spent the night. I think it was I went in the first day of the season and spent the night in the blind, and then I was there the next morning for when the hunt started. And he was actually passing through probably 20 minutes after legal light started. But he just had a bunch of stuff blocking his vitals. And so I didn't kill that deer. I ended up killing the other deer that I was spending my time hunting in the afternoons. But both of those deer were really close to soybeans. And so the one that I was hunting of a morning, it's weird to say, but I was actually really close to the soybean field edge. But the one in the afternoon, I was backed much further away from the beans, and I was along one of those transition routes.
That's a really good, good topic you bring up there is we all fall in love with hunting over the food because you see more deer. Mm-hmm. But if you're after a particular buck, a lot of times he's not showing up till right at the end, or he's getting into an area, that you can't be close to. Kind of on the same topic, great tactic.
Yeah, sorry, I sidebarred way too many times.
No, that's
there.
great. No, the tactic about sleeping in your blind was reminding me of when you're talking about exceptions. The exceptions I have used many times in the past was another thing that used to fall into a lot was easiest access. Easiest access is walking across the field to get into that stand or that blind. But in some cases, what I would do, I knew a neighbor was hunting and didn't want me on their property, but I just would, in several cases, I got permission. Can I just walk on this one end so I can exit my stand, like at night? I'm not hunting, and they allowed me to do that. So it allowed me to get out of stands and not educate deer, because that's kind of the name of the game for that early season. If you're not getting it done on that first sit, you got to figure out a way to lessen your footprint, literally, to keep, because that law of diminishing returns just kicks in if you blow one deer out of there, right?
Yeah, I think so. And a good sell for your neighbor, especially if you're both hunting small properties, is it helps both of you.
Right.
Because if say you're hunting small tracts that are like 20, 30, 40, 50 acres, even 100 acres, if you are both accessing your stands in ways that are better for the general area, you're going to preserve the hunting there for both of you.
For everybody, yeah.
So I feel like, that's, and obviously you need to reciprocate. If he's going to let you do that, then somebody out there, you need to let them do that too. So it goes both ways. And that's one of the things too that a lot of people overlook, I think, when it comes to the small property element, is we try to, everybody likes to frame deer hunting as competition. Oh, I got to shoot this buck before my neighbor does. If we started working with our neighbors more and developed better relationships with our neighbors, we would have much better hunting experiences.
All across the board, amen. Because if you are secretive and competing, I have found that's counterproductive for both people. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Wildlife Research Center and the new Golden Rope Scent Rope Kit. The kit comes with 4 ounces of Golden Rope Scent Concentrate, 3 cable ties, and 3 scent ropes made of proprietary fibers meant to absorb the maximum amount of scent. Simply saturate the rope in your scent of choice, hang it from a branch, and watch the trail cam photos come flying in. For more information, go to wildlife.com.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're hunting soybeans. We get excited about that. It's awesome. But now, for whatever reason, weather-related, when those crops got planted, whatever, you get to September, that field's yellow. Now what do you do?
Yeah, so to that point, I love to spend time searching for late planted beans. And so usually, it's not always the case, but sometimes if you might realize that the farmer had to plant a certain field later because it flooded, or maybe it's in a low-lying area and it just didn't dry out in time, to plant at the same time as the rest. And so oftentimes, though, once the 80-90% of the fields turn yellow, you'll start to see some of these other fields that are still green really suck deer in. And I think deer still consume, yellowed soybean fields, but I do think that the green leaves.
Green's the way to go.
Yeah.
I'd always say soybeans early, alfalfa early, if you have good alfalfa. And obviously mass trees, but how often can you bank on a good oak crop?
It varies so much. But, obviously white oaks are king early season. So once we get into mid-September, especially late September, we start to see declining activity on most of the food sources, field food sources, whether it's soybeans, alfalfa, whatever it is, food plots, because we do have a lot of white oaks, and they are relatively, unless there's just a crop failure, they're relatively predictable. Consistent. Where I'm at.
Yeah.
We have a lot of really mature white oaks. There are not a lot of young ones. There are a lot of old, like 100, 200
wow.
year,
I'd love to just see those
oaks.
trees.
Yeah, well, there's one that has to be, we've had somebody look at, has to be up there around the 250,
My
260 year old.
Wow.
I mean, the thing is massive. Like, it's just huge. Probably older than our
and
country.
still producing.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's several of those in a little small pocket. But yeah, no, the properties that I hunt, we do have quite a few white oaks, and they are pretty reliable. And so we notably every year have to shift our stand locations to accommodate that, because the deer they still eat the soybeans. But here the thing about it is most of these, the way our property is that we hunt, the properties we hunt are configured, most of the bedding areas are kind of centralized, and then on the exteriors of those are the oak trees, and then past that you have the soybean fields or the corn fields, and so it's not that they've just quit eating the soybeans. It's just that they get up out of their beds and, they go 50 yards, 100 yards, and boom, there's acorns on the ground. And deer, they're concentrate selectors. They eat a little bit of this and they eat a little bit of that. They eat the best parts of all the best plants. And so they're going to stop and eat those acorns. And so, they're still going to go hit that soybean field later, but it's going to be after dark, more than likely. And that's usually what we see once we get into late September. It's not because of hunting pressure. It's not because of, at least in my opinion, where we're hunting at, because we're very cognizant of how much pressure we apply. I think it's more about the mass crops. I think it's a lot has to do with, of course, as you well know, the deer eats hundreds of plant species. They're primarily browse animals, and the browse species attractiveness levels change throughout the year too. And as we get further into the fall, deer are kind of gearing more toward those high fiber browse species.
Right.
And so I think it has a lot to do with the mass crops, the white oaks. Obviously, red oaks are not a factor, during the early season, at least not for me where I hunt. Maybe in other places they are, but it's all white oak action where I hunt. But red oaks become very, very important once you get into like November, especially December and January.
Wow. See, that's different for us. We oaks by us, obviously, if you have good white oaks, dynamite. If you have some kind of soft mass like we do, apples and stuff like dynamite. Even berry brush, even some sumac varieties, wing sumac by us. But red oaks, if we have them, they're going to be on them in September, which is a little bit different. And that's the beauty of hunting whitetails across the country, is you do learn those kind of those seasonal shifts, I guess you could call it, with food preferences. But the other question I want to ask you, Josh, is for you in particular, you're hunting at home. Give everybody an idea. Do you have all these stand sites pre-selected, ready to go, or are you more mobile in how you approach it as the season starts and progresses?
So one of the things that I love to do this time of year, it's not this time of year, February, March, April, is I like to study the properties. If I get them, if I have them in, fast enough, if I do lease properties, and sometimes timing doesn't allow for this. But if you have it already available, I love to use the early part of the off season, late winter and early spring, to study the properties in anticipation. Okay, the crop rotation is going to be this. I did some scouting during the off season, and I found a pocket of oaks over here. And I reassess the properties every single year, because even though there might not be significant changes, there's going to be some changes. You're going to know something. At least where I'm hunting, I notice. Okay, well the primary deer trail has shifted maybe 30 yards this way or 40 yards that way because of how the neighbor is coming and accessing this corner of his property. Little things here and there. And so the late winter and early spring, I love to go ahead and deploy all of my available tree stands on the properties that I plan to hunt, and they will be in relatively permanent positions. That said, I keep one or two really mobile, lightweight tree stand sets that I use on the fly, and I go both. So like I'll use some of my permanent position stand locations that I have deployed, whether that be sometime between February or June. Sometimes it carries over into June, maybe even July if I notice a pattern during my preseason scouting. But I like both. There's a tree stand, usually 2 tree stands and sets of lightweight sticks that I keep at my house or in my truck all through deer season.
Really nice. What about blind usage? Do you use pop-up blinds, portable blinds, semi-permanent blinds?
Yeah, I do. I don't have many, but I keep about 2 or 3 pop-up blinds that I use for special situations. Usually these are going to be for whenever I'm hunting with somebody. So every year I take new hunters. So I make it a goal to take at least 1 or 2 new hunters each year and introduce them to hunting. Awesome. Usually I try to take 1 new hunter every year, and then somebody that I've been taking for a while, and I try to stay with a new hunter for 2 to 3 years, because it kind of, in my opinion, if you take somebody one time and they kill a deer, they can fall away pretty easily. But if you stick with them for 2 or 3 or 4 years and kind of keep them engaged, eventually they kind of spread their wings and fly, so to speak. So this year, prime example, there's an individual that I go to church with. He actually started hunting last year, killed his first deer last season, as well as 2023 season, I should say, and then this past year, the 2024 season, we were going again, and so the first year he got a doe, and then this season, it's still going, he got a doe back in November, and we're trying to get him his first buck, and so we've been hunting a lot together, and so that's obviously a prime opportunity for those hub style pop-up blinds, and so we've been hunting out of those a lot. I also have some of the permanent, hard-sided blinds that I have. Not many. I only have 2, but I've got those deployed in probably some of my better spots, as I was talking about earlier, sleeping in the blind, for those early season morning hunts. Sometimes that's, especially if your access isn't right, that's the only way you can get in and out without spooking deer, is to kind of spend the night. And I know that sounds weird, but if you're dedicated enough, I guess, or silly enough like me, you might try it. So, but anyway, I think there's a place for all of the different types of hunting, whether it be tree stand, saddle. It's not something I've done, but saddle hunting, obviously it's carved its niche. Lightweight hang-ons, ladder stands, pop-up blinds, permanent blinds. I use all of the different platforms, I guess, every single season. And it really, what I choose is just based on the situation at hand, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah, I do the same thing. It's for me, it's about wind direction, and it's about having those options. And when you have the options, you can make those decisions a lot easier. Okay, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate this. I want to remind you guys, you have to pick up Deer and Deer Hunting. It's a cheap resource delivered to your mailbox or to your phone if you want to get a digital subscription, $15, I believe it is. Just log on to our website, deeranddeerhunting.com. And then listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, all we ask you to do is like and subscribe. For Josh Honeycutt, thank you for joining us. Josh, we'll have you again on here soon, and people are going to see you on TV, I'm sure.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an honor just to be able to contribute to the brand on all the different platforms that you guys are delivering to people. It's been a blessing and an honor.
We're happy to have you aboard. For Josh Honeycutt, I am Dan Schmidt. Join us again next week, Thursday, for another brand new episode of Deer Talk Now.